Hello everyone, Bag here, and welcome to my complete Dan Heng Permansor Tarrae guide. Here we'll take a look at his builds, his teams, his playstyles, and his premium options, so that you can be a more informed player in Polar than when you got here. Timestamps are below if you do not need a kit summary, and with that, let's get into things. Dan Heng PT, or Dipped as I alone call him, is a free 5-star physical preservation unit with a relatively simple shielding kit. To start off, his basic does nothing special, while his skill initiates the main crux of his kit. First off, Dipped does a very bog standard shield to the entire team, where we should note here that all of his shields scale off of attack, but also he is able to target one ally with this ability, who is then designated as the bond mate. We should also quickly pivot to his technique, where his skill is used at the start of combat for no SP, like Ranmei or Suridra's technique, where the bond mate status is then given to whoever initiated combat, also like Suridra's technique. As the bond mate, you get a lot of unique properties. For one, Dipped gives the bond mate a summon, named Soul Dragon. To clarify, this is a summon, not a member sprite, so it cannot be targeted by enemies and it isn't affected by ally action advances. Besides Sunday, obviously. Soul Dragon has a speed of 165, and on its turn, it simply shields the team with a semi-weak shield while also providing an AoE cleanse. Dip's shields can also stack on top of each other, up to 3 skills worth of shielding. Dip's ultimate is where Soul Dragon's use actually shows itself, as after an AoE hit from Dipped that applies the same shield as a skill, Soul Dragon becomes enhanced. For its next 2 turns, on top of shielding and cleansing, Soul Dragon does an AoE follow-up attack. This attack starts with an initial hit off of Dip's attack, before then doing additional damage that scales off of the bondmate stats. It says attack, but it also inherits the bondmate's crit, damage percent, and whatever else. Here is where we have to discern what Dipped giving the bondmate a summon means. At base, this means any condition that requires a summon now works for the bondmate. This is relevant mostly just with Sunday's skill, giving its full 80 damage percent, but also the ability for the bondmate to use Banana Amusement. However, since Soul Dragon's follow-ups uses Dipped attack for the actual hit, Soul Dragon's attack counts as coming from Dipped. So no, there aren't any special synergies where Soul Dragon can proc the bondmate's on-hit effects. At least not anymore. And as one last note, additional damage can't proc Super Break, so break units don't really get anything special off of Soul Dragon's hits. Getting into his traces, his minor ones give attack percent, def percent, and speed. The attack percent is notable, as Dipp's first trace gives the bondmate an attack buff equal to 15% of Dipp's attack. This buff heavily varies on how he is built and whether or not he has a signature, but with speed boots, an ER rope, and a generic high base attack light cone, he'll have around 3,300 attack, which means the bondmate gets around 495 attack. With his signature, his attack jumps up to around 4,000, which then gives the bondmate 600 attack. This amount of attack rolls is pretty low. For reference, my own Dipped reaches about 3.5k attack while using Yanqing's signature, so the arbitrary number of 3.3k attack in this video is more of a lowball, with the understanding that your performance will likely be a bit better. Around 500 attack is what you can expect from switching to a main stat attack relic, so yeah, it's a pretty hefty amount. His second trace gives him an action advance at the start of combat, while then also giving him 6 energy and Soul Dragon a 15% action advance for every attack from the bondmate. This means his energy rotation is incredibly inconsistent, as we'll get into later. And for his final trace, Soul Dragon gets some add-ons, with an additional small shield to the ally with the weakest shield whenever Soul Dragon acts, as well as an additional instance of additional damage that scales off of the bondmate to the enemy with the most HP whenever it does its AoE attacks. For leveling priority, his ultimate is what determines Soul Dragon's damage, while his skill and talent boosts his shield strength. One of Dipp's strengths is his high shield strength, so leveling these talents to their max lets you best make use of that. For how to play Dipped, well, on the surface it's pretty simple. Dipped himself is about as standard of a shielder as you can get. You want to basic on him for as much SP as possible, and then you skill when you need to shield. It's really that simple. The 2 things that complicate him are Soul Dragon and his energy problems. Dipped doesn't really have a typical energy rotation, both due to his second trace, and because it can also vary with how fast Soul Dragon consumes its 2 AoE hits per ultimate. Generally though, you'll have way more Soul Dragon turns compared to how many turns Dipped can buff, especially if you also have Sunday action advancing it when he skills the bondmate. So the baseline name of the game is just to get as much energy as possible. For his starting rotation, if we say an ER rope and planar, you can get a turn 1 ult by skilling, which you'll be able to get off fast thanks to his second trace's initial action advance. But with a basic you'll be a bit off, which means you'll need a bit of help either from the bondmate attacking once or from the enemy hitting you at all. Getting his ult off before the bondmate attacks lets you fully benefit from the bondmate charging for his next ult, which can be doubly important if you have allies who attack consecutively with you not being able to use Dipp's ult in between their attacks. For his actual energy, assuming he only basics, you would need 11 hits from the bondmate to fill his ult up in a 2-turn rotation. Of course, Dipped is a preservation unit, so he has a high higher taunt value. And also, we can just plainly assume that he gets hit a couple times through the fact that you need a shielder to shield in the first place. In other words, if Dipped isn't getting hit at all, then why are you running a sustain for the fight in the first place? The more he gets hit, the less the bondmate has to attack. Although, again, the 2-turn ult rotation is kind of arbitrary, as Soul Dragon can stack and store the AoE hits that it gets from Dipped, so there's no real downside to just ulting as much as you can with Dipped. The other thing to know here is that his E1 and S1 give a 3-turn buff from his ultimate, which can have pretty low uptime thanks to Sunday's constant action advancing. So in this case, getting fast ults means a lot for him. For a high-end team in terms of giving him energy, like for example Ceridra and Noxa Sunday, if Anoxa gets 2 peerages, he attacks 14 times in total throughout 2 -1 speed setup rotations. So he can do like 4 skill, 2 skill, 4 skill, 2 skill, with 2 ults also somewhere in that. This exactly gets Dipped enough energy for a 2-turn ult with an attack rope, which would then mean a bigger buff for Anoxa and a larger shield for the team. This is, again, assuming he doesn't get hit or skill at all, so this won't be as tight of an actual energy rotation in a real fight. Without Ceridra, obviously this falls apart, although Robin's action advance can make up for this by giving the team, including Dipped, extra turns per cycle. For non-Anoxa carries that use Sunday, if we assume they attack around 6 times in 2 turns, like 4 actions and 2 ults, or if they have other action advances like a Saber Mana Burst, then with an ER rope that adds up to about 100 energy, meaning that you need 35 energy in 2 turns from the enemy for a 2-turn ult, which I would say is rather realistic. Past his energy problems, Soul Dragon's turn is another thing to consider. With its 165 speed, it'll be faster than most carries, and with constant action advances from the bondmate's actions, it might even lap them. Assuming Dipped isn't getting some insane 1-turn ult rotation from being hit like 1,000 times, around half of Soul Dragon's turns won't be AoE hits, which means it's not as important to optimize them if you aren't in desperate need of shielding in a given fight. If you do want to optimize it, then the main way is with Sunday. Sunday, no matter what, always places Soul Dragon behind the bondmate with the action advance, meaning the bondmate's hits then get wasted in terms of giving Soul Dragon an action advance. But if you ult with the bondmate after the action advance but before the bondmate's turn starts, that all pushes the Soul Dragon forward, letting it act first, which then can let it benefit from the action advances. This can also mean pushing forward Soul Dragon's AoE hit before the bondmate's turn starts, which can be nice if you want to, say, attempt to clear out ads so that Anox's bounces are more focused on the elite enemies, or something like that. But yeah, Sunday is generally great here for giving Soul Dragon faster turns, which then means more shielding, which then makes Dipped all the more comfortable to use. I also really don't want to downplay how good it is for Dipped to activate Sunday's extra 50 damage percent here, as that much damage amp coming from a free sustain is very, very good. Other than that, for his actual sustain, things are again pretty simple. He'll have very beefy shields thanks to Soul Dragon's constant refreshes. With around 3,300 attack, his skill and ultimate shield will be around 1,300 strong, or 1,460 strong with his signature and around 4,000 attack. Soul Dragon's shields are just half of this, and again with how often that refreshes, that's pretty dang good. His shielding won't be that much more impressive than Aventurine's in isolation, although in exchange for losing Aventurine's reactive shielding, Dipped's proactive shielding has an easier time keeping its duration from running out on fast carries. With Sunday action advancing Soul Dragon, it'll be almost impossible for their shield's 3-turn duration to run out, whereas for teams without Sunday, Soul Dragon will still be able to take 1 turn faster than anyone else can take 3 turns, maybe besides some double Herda ult shenanigans. Plus, if Dipped can stack up his shield enough, his 300% shield effect limit compared to Aventurine's 200% means that he will overtake him in nuke tanking so long as the enemy gives him the chance to stack up. His technique skill into turn 1 skill into ultimate also gives him this maxed out shield immediately, which does give him a good head start. His consistent, strong, SP positive shielding, coupled with his 100% uptime attack buff and Soul Dragon's AoE hits, are the main reason to field him. And in that, a lot of what I've talked about for optimizing him is largely not that needed to get his baseline utility. You slap bondmate onto the carry, you ult whenever you can or whenever you need it sustain, and you basic attack as much as you can. For most players, that's all you really need to know, but keeping in mind how his energy and Soul Dragon works isn't a bad idea either. A plug here to subscribe. We are currently in the middle of Cyrene's pre-release cycle, so if you want this type of coverage for her in a few weeks, then drop a sub and stick around. Alright, back to the vid. For gearing, his sets are relatively obvious. For main sets, he has a new shielding set that is made for him, giving shield strength and a crit damage buff to the whole team. With his signature Light Cone's healing, you can go Warrior Goddess for its 12% speed, but with its 2-turn buff uptime, you really have to have confidence in his 2-turn ult rotation, and you're missing out on 22% shield strength, which might be a deal breaker in tough fights. For planers, you literally always want a set with 5% ER. Von Wack is kinda whatever on him thanks to him already having having it in his second trace, so the real options are Penacony or Lushaka. Lushaka should literally always work, since you're using him on attack scalars and attack scalars alone, but if you have Penacony for physical bond mates, then go ahead. For stats, you want an attack body and an attack orb for maximizing his shield strength and buff. For boots, you probably want speed just for having adequate SP generation and energy generation for himself. Like with Aventurine though, you can go attack boots instead for either teams that don't care about SP or for fights where the larger shield is necessary. I'd still say speed boots are generally preferable, but both can work. And for the rope, we've already talked at length about his energy in the playstyle section. So the basic recommendation is that ER is more comfortable for getting more soul dragon attacks and shields from his ultimate, and it's important for his uptime of his E1 and S1's buffs, but attack gives a larger buff, and if the team or energy's frequent attacks gives Dipped enough energy, like if he somehow gets close to a one-turn ult with an attack rope, or if he gets free ults from the fight or Cyrene, then ER might not make much of a difference for him anyways. My general recommendation is to go ER rope, but again for tough fights like an Anomaly Arbitration, an attack rope might be needed for the marginally thicker shields. As stated previously, switching to an attack main stat gives about 400 to 500 more attack, although with an attack main stat, you can't run attack percent substats, which could otherwise close the gap a bit if you do end up getting absolutely cracked substats. But in any case, 450 more attack means 67 more attack for the bond mate, which is decent and worth a couple substats at least, while his shields get 100 stronger from his skill and ult, and around 50 stronger from Soul Dragon, which again is not bad, but maybe not worth bending over backwards over. For stats to go for, a specific amount of attack is nebulous based on his light cone and gearing, but generally just get it as high as possible. 3,300 attack without his signature, and 4,000 attack with his signature is the start of what I would call good, but if you can optimize your build to go higher, then go for it. The only other stat that matters is speed. If you are running speed boots, then a minimum of 136 speed is your starting point, mainly just so you can generate SP before the turn of the -1 speed setup that your team is probably running. You can also aim for a high end of 161 speed if you really want to min-max him. Although with that many speed substats, you want to make sure that you aren't sacrificing that many attack substats to reach this breakpoint. For teams that really want that extra SP generation, like Triple Dot, Cyrene teams by the looks of it, or with Archer, stacking speed does become a lot more viable. But generally, I would say attack percent is what you'd want to aim for the main stat to min-max. Also, due to his second trace, his speed is obviously a bit messed up in the first wave, where he then stays misaligned for the entirety of APOC, Pure Fiction, and Anomaly Arbitration. But the second wave of MOC, or something like a Robin ult, will realign him with his normal speed breakpoints. And yes, to clarify, although Dipped does do his own hits with his ultimate hit and in Soul Dragon's follow-up, he's not going to be really doing that much actual damage by himself, so building crit isn't a priority at all. For light cones, he's got a pretty weird selection. We've already talked about his signature a lot in this video, but to explain it in full, its main appeal is giving about 600 to 700 more attack to Dipped, which means a slightly larger attack buff to the bond mate and more chunky shields. Additionally, his ultimate restores HP to the team, while giving an additional heal to the lowest HP ally. Also from his ultimate, you get a 3-turn buff of 36 damage percent to units with summons, including the bond mate with Soul Dragon, and 24 damage percent for everyone else. In terms of signatures, this is not a bad option. Comfort from the larger shields is always welcome, and the attack buff and damage percent are better than the literal nothingness than the other options provide. So the question is this: is around 100 more attack and 36 damage percent to the bond mate worth an entire signature light cone pull? In my opinion, while again it's not a bad option, it's also kinda hard to really recommend, mostly just because it provides nothing but raw damage buffs, where his vertical investment competition either is better in buffing damage or better for opening up new team synergies. So don't feel pressured at all to go for this. It's good, but very workaroundable. The other main option to go for is, as referenced earlier, any high base attack light cone. Free options include Yenching or Clara's signature, or higher up would be something like Feixiao, the Herda, Hycelin's, or Acheron signature, and then the highest up is Finon signature. Most preservation light cones do literally nothing for Dipped in terms of utility or for his attack, so something simple like this instead is usually your best option. The Battle Pass light cone does give shield effect and damage percent, but its attack is very low compared to your alternatives. Yes, at S5, the 20 damage percent is worth it over losing around 75 attack on the bond mate compared to using Yenching's signature, but the gap is so marginal that I would never call it worth it to buy 5 battle passes for this. Dipped can also proc Aventurine's light cone for its 10% vulnerability, but otherwise its defense and crit buffs do nothing for him. In dot teams, Gapard's signature can give him 24% effective rate, which can get him closer to the 75 effective rate needed to proc Kafka's 100% attack buff. Trend is also obligatory for Acheron teams, although the very low base attack means that you might need to skill more often for his shields to be at their normal level level of quality. And then lastly, Fushuan's signature gives him some comfy ER, so if you want to run this alongside an attack rope, then I think that's a pretty viable idea. For teams, I already have a teammate tier list that I'm assuming most of you have already seen. But, well, frankly, there's only 3 main questions to consider with a carry that determines how well they use dipped. Do they scale off of attack? Do they use Sunday? And do they already rely on other sustains? If they do use Sunday, then dipped activating Sunday's extra 50 damage % becomes a huge selling point for him, if the carry doesn't already activate it by having a summon himself. This, plus his permanent attack buff, is so much better than something like Ho-Ho's 2-turn 40% attack buff, to the point where his generic utility can still outdo her very important energy from her ultimate in a lot of teams. Obviously, the carry needs to scale off of attack for dipped's buffing, and also every HP scaler likes to take damage, so even Sunday teams like Blade and Jingliu don't want dipped at all, obviously. And then lastly, we have to consider if a team already uses another sustain's utility, such as, again, Ho-Ho's energy, or something like Aventurian's faster hit frequency depending on the fight. Even if not all of these questions line up for a carry, dipped can still be best in slot for them. Archer doesn't use Sunday, but dipped is still amazing for him, with much better buffs than Gallagher in exchange for slightly worse SP generation. Same goes for Fei Xiao and the Herta, where you don't need Sunday to activate dipped here, and he remains competitive against other sustains, with better buffing but worse energy generation. And for any of these teams, it should go without saying that slotting in Sunday becomes a lot more viable, and these fringe Sunday dipped teams can still be competitive with their actual best in slot teams, even if Sunday does still lose out ultimately over the more tailored supports for each carry. Saber really likes Ho-Ho's energy, but dipped's consistent buffing and Sunday utilization can make up for losing Ho-Ho depending on how many extra ults Ho-Ho would give in a fight. And then there's units like Anoxa, where there really are no significant caveats, and dipped is undoubtedly his best in slot in his current teams. Although Cyrene might change that, but that remains to be seen. Dot and Iglea are the only teams where Ho-Ho is just firmly better, although at least for Dot I would still call dipped a very good alternative. And finally, yes, his buffing is also good for Finon, and Soul Dragon does follow him into his territory, but dipped's core flame generation is just so terrible that he's really not best in slot unless if you genuinely need the sustain to clear in the first place. And right now, you do not need that sustain in the vast majority of fights. Special mention goes to Anomaly Arbitration, where special synergies be damned, and dipped might be flat out needed to survive the higher amount of damage from the enemy. Lastly, we have his Eidolons. For E1, his ultimate gives 1 skill point and 18 res pen for 3 turns. As we've talked about, 3 turns is a bit low uptime on a lot of his teams, since he pairs so well with Sunday, who is usually ran in a -1 speed setup. Especially with the likes of Saber or the Herta, you can expect us to run out fast, in which case I can't call it the most impressive E1 in the world. But separate from that problem, 18 res pen is pretty good from a sustain. And for Archer teams, 1 SP per ult is the exact type of utility that he's looking for. And with Sparkle instead of Sunday, he's going to take a lot longer burning through those 3 turns of the buff. I do think his E1 is generally better than his S1, although of course S1 is cheaper and neither of them are really needed to make him any more usable or universal. His E2 gives his ult 2 more charges for Soul Dragon and 100% action advance for Soul Dragon, and Soul Dragon's damage and shield effect become flat out doubled. For E2 standards, I don't think this damage increase will be doing too much. More than doubling Soul Dragon's damage thanks to it having more AoE attacks is very strong, but it feels a bit underwhelming when comparing it to something like E2 Finon, Thurda, or Evernight. But the point of sustained vertical investment is to cast a wide net, and to buff multiple teams in a minor way instead of uber investing into one specific team. In that sense, the C2 does a great job, but going for 2 Eidolons and dipped is still a lot less worth than, say, getting 1 Eidolon for Robin and 1 for Tribby. But if you want dipped to stay relevant for longer, then I can't say it's too bad. His E4 is terrible, and his E6 gives 20% vulnerability, 12 death shred on the bomb mate, and a hit from the bomb mate on dipped's ultimate with 330% scaling and an AoE attack. The damage buffs are rather low for an E6, and none of his Eidolons actually give him anything to spam his ult more frequently with, so I would say I'm rather underwhelmed by this. Not bad, but not worth 6 copies of dipped on top of the free one, that's for sure. And that's everything. A quick stop to the channel member corner. Thank you all again for your support to me and my channel. And with that, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye!